the preacher's kid. At least that's what they say. I was the lawyer's kid. That wasn't easy either. But often the impression is that many preacher kids go running from the church to never return again. They have seen the good, the bad, and the really ugly of church dynamics. They have been forced to spend hours bored in the church building as adults have endless hours of meetings while other kids get to do fun activities. They can't play Sunday morning sports. They must and have to attend youth activities. They get talked about in sermons, and everyone knows their name. Yet while I have seen preacher kids leave the church, I must admit, I have seen more of them stay. In fact, some of the most active and amazing lay members in the churches I have served are preacher kids. Some of the most passionate people working in nonprofits and trying to change the world in a daily way are preacher kids. Some of the best preachers are preacher kids. So I began to speculate. I wondered why preachers' kids do remain faithful. Some may feel obligated to the passion they learned and saw from their parents. But often I wonder is it because they learn early on that the church is imperfect. Yet even in the middle of this imperfection, good things and God-filled moments can occur within and around the community. And then I wondered if it's because they have seen the hurt feelings and the endless exhaustion felt by families. Yet they still know at the end of the day, there is true prayerful power in relationships that give them an example of a God that can truly provide strength to the weary. Basically, preacher kids learn that they can still find God at home, in the church, and in the world, even when it's difficult. They learned by watching their families endure that faith and know that faith is what guided them to endure in the everyday. They saw personal and communal relationships of God in their experience. But of course, it's still hard to be a preacher's kid. And as we walk through the stories of women throughout most of this summer, I continued to think about the women who were put as part of Moses' story. Last week we talked about Moses' sister Miriam, but often Moses' wife, commonly named Zipporah, is not really mentioned. And there are a lot of missing details and inconsistent pieces when it comes to Moses' marriage. We read today in our scripture in Exodus chapter 2, verses 15 through 25, that Zipporah was an outsider, a Midianite. She, like others, however, in the Torah stories, first met Moses at a well. If you ever look, the well connects so many parts of our biblical understanding. Zipporah was not a Hebrew. She was not an Egyptian. Her father was actually one of the primary leaders for an entire different group of people. Thus, there are midrash stories about Zipporah and what she may really be like. In those different stories, she's described as a princess and leader in her own right, someone who could handle what it meant to be married to Moses and not lose her own identity. I mean, Moses is such a prominent figure. We must kind of sometimes wonder, what was it like to be part of Moses' family? Zipporah is said to have two sons with Moses, First, they had Gershom, whose name means stranger, foreigner, immigrant, outsider. Second, they had Eliezer, whose name means help of my God. Both of these children were born to Moses early in their relationship, when Zipporah and Moses were both still in Midian. But like many preacher kids, there came a time when God called their family to move. They continued to be a family where someone was always going to be a stranger in a different land. And the only way to truly survive this reality was to continue to trust God's help. And even though that's what their names were, it probably wasn't easy. I am sure Zipporah got frustrated, saying things like, Moses, you have to go to Pharaoh's for a meeting again? Were the locusts not enough? She had to get to know a whole group of new people after leaving her family and the comforts of her home. I wonder if it was easy to be connected to Moses, such a prominent and busy person in a place that wasn't her home, that wasn't a place she was used to. How did she handle these changes with her children? They were strangers and they needed help from God. I mean, it's hard enough to be a preacher's kid, but what about being Moses' kid? I mean, what do you get Moses for Father's Day? And while I often think of the details and the struggles of the Hebrew people and their leaders, we sometimes really forget the family dynamics and struggles. We see Moses as this leader and forget that he is a father, he is a husband. His family has to struggle with his call, his moving and question, and his call by God is great and challenging. But did his kids recognize his bigger calling when Moses was late and not able to tuck them into bed after reading the Torah? Or did they just get mad and spend a lot of time in the forest, alone, without the Hebrew community? I pray that someday my children will understand why I had to leave them sometimes for ministry trips. I hope they witness in the church and in the home the crucial importance of authentic faith in the face of imperfect realities. I hope they understand the struggles their dad endures and his job for all of us to live more completely into a place of abundance as we strive to bring abundance to all of God's creation as a family. I hope they end up as amazing as many of the preacher kids I have known. Because in my world where many others have walked away from church, some of the best lay ministers, like I said, are preacher's kids. Even though they have often felt like strangers when forced to go to new places, they still have a deep sense of call and purpose that they are still called as ministers, and God is helping them to be a part, an active part, of a bigger family of God's love. I mean, have you met Amy Compton? I wrote this before I knew anything about your week, Amy. Well, I know there are times when Amy probably thinks about running to the hills as she works extra overtime as our board chair. Clearly her ministry in teaching, her love of family, and her devotion to this church is profoundly felt. Her dad, and along with her mom, who I'm sure as the minister's wife probably did a lot of unpaid church ministry, did an amazing job. And so today on Father's Day, we celebrate your dad's legacy through you and your family this holiday, because you are one of many amazing PKs. And I have known other PKs who, as I was writing this sermon, brightened my smile with their faith. I thought of one of our closest friends, Rob's too, Ron Pollard, who misbehaved his entire PK life and is still misbehaving as he serves his church. Or Mark Harper, who has the heart of a faithful giver like none other I have ever seen. And I thought of this as his father's memorial was this past week. I thought of Zach Baird, who is surrounded by a family of pastors, including his own twin brother, and yet still stands strong as a lay leader in multiple levels of ministry in the church. And of course, I saw and I thought of the power of being a preacher's kid and grandkid this week. I saw the power of being a child of active, passionate church lay members. Those kids like Maddie and Michaela, who are at church even more than my kids are. Those young people who we continue to empower to take on difficult faith realities as they claim that God's love is big enough for all of us. God's love is what truly frees the oppressed. God, who like in the time of Moses, still hears our cries of grief and understands what our hearts need. God, who remembers the power of family and has not forgotten our ancestors' prayers and realities to get us there. And thus, I do not know what gifts Moses' children or wife would scrounge together in celebration. But I can bet, like many of the quality men in our world, he struggled balancing it all. There were sacrifices that he made that was hard. And yet at the end of the day, Moses led his own and many other children to a place of hope. Hope. And that is the gift of all good men. Those men who seek to sacredly father us all, to know that even in the toughest of times, there is hope, and there is God, even in the imperfect realities. And thank you to all of those sacred men. Happy Father's Day. Amen.